Okay, ready to dive in today. We're tackling those excerpts from Steven Pinker's Rationality that you sent over.
Yeah, looking forward to this one.
Me too. It's just what really gets you thinking about this whole idea of rationality.
For sure.
Like you look around and there's irrationality everywhere you look, right?
Totally. Yeah, it's like,
But at the same time, we humans have accomplished some pretty amazing things too.
yeah, it's that paradox that Pinker puts front and center, isn't it?
It
Like,
is.
how can we be capable of these incredible intellectual leaps, like landing on the moon,
Right.
but then turn around and fall for the silliest, most head-scratching beliefs and biases?
Exactly. It's like our brains are wired for brilliance and blunders all at the same time. How do you even explain that?
Well, that's where Pinker's idea of ecological rationality comes in. Okay, so tell me more about that, because that's one of the things I wanted to dig into. So think of it this way. Your brain, right? It comes preloaded with these tools for navigating certain environments, but not others.
Okay.
So take the sand people of the Kalahari Desert, for example. They're like the ultimate trackers.
Oh, yeah. Read that section. Unbelievable.
Right. They can deduce all this information from the tiniest cues in the sand.
It's mind-blowing. Like, they can tell you the animal's age, whether it was male or female, even if it was tired or injured just from its tracks.
And that's because their environment, it demanded that kind of hyper-awareness for survival, so their brains adapted.
Makes sense. That's ecological rationality in action then.
Precisely. But here's the thing. Our modern world, all this information overload, these complex systems, it demands a different set of tools.
So it's not enough to be a master tracker in the digital age.
Exactly. We need different skills to navigate this world. Things like formal logic, understanding probability, and honing those critical thinking skills.
It's like we need a mental software upgrade.
I like that. A mental software upgrade for the information age.
Mm.
Because we're dealing with information coming at us from all directions, and not all of it's reliable.
So how do we sift through all that noise and figure out what's actually true, what's reliable?
Well, Pinker would say that's where logic comes in, and that's what we're going to unpack next.
So logic is key here. That's the foundation for making sense of anything, right?
Absolutely. Pinker's a huge proponent of logic. He even starts this whole section by reminding us of its power, that ability to take facts and deduce new truths from them.
Right, like a logical chain reaction.
Exactly. And to illustrate this, he throws this really interesting logic puzzle at us, the one with the king and the bird.
Oh, yeah, that one really threw me off at first, I have to admit.
It's designed to, you think it's going to be straightforward, flip over these coins, test out the rule, but
But our brains just want to jump to conclusions.
exactly. And that's Pinker's whole point. Even with something as seemingly clear-cut as logic, we can still trip up.
So he's saying we can't always trust our gut instincts, even about logic.
Right, and he gets even more into the nitty-gritty by breaking down these common logical fallacies into two main categories. Formal fallacies, those are errors in, like, the structure of the argument itself, and then informal fallacies. Those are more about the content, which can make them a lot harder to spot.
Okay, so that's interesting enough, but how do I actually put this into practice? It's not like I'm analyzing every conversation for logical fallacies.
Right, well, Pinker gets that real-world arguments are messy. They're not as neat and tidy as the examples in textbooks.
For sure, and I feel like part of that is that so many of the things we're talking about in everyday life aren't black and white at all. They're fuzzy.
Exactly. And Pinker uses this term, family resemblances, to describe this.
Family resemblances. Okay, now you have to explain that one.
Basically, it means that things in a category, they share some overlapping similarities, but there's not necessarily one single defining feature that applies to all of them. Think of it like looking at a family photo album.
Okay, I'm starting to see where you're going with this.
Right, so you might see some similar noses, maybe similar smiles, but you wouldn't expect every single family member to have the exact same nose.
Right.
So how does this relate to logic? Well, Pinker gives this hilarious example of a political campaign email he got.
Oh no, was it one of those that completely butchers logic?
It was. They were basically like, support voter registration by donating today, as if voter registration is this charitable cause, not just the basic process of registering to vote.
Oh man, classic. It's like they completely missed the point.
They did, and that's what can happen with these fuzzy concepts, right? They're ripe for manipulation.
Which makes me think about all the times I've probably encountered this fuzzy logic without realizing it.
It's everywhere, especially in advertising, political speeches, even everyday conversations.
It's true. And speaking of things that can really trip us up, how about probability? because Pinker also talks about how our brains are wired to see patterns even where they don't exist.
Oh, yeah, and he gives these great examples of common probability pitfalls. We've fallen into like confusing probability with propensity, misunderstanding conditional probabilities, and of course, the one we all know and love, the availability heuristic.
The availability heuristic, isn't that the one where, like, if we can easily recall something, we think it's more likely to happen?
Exactly. Like you see one news report about a shark attack, and suddenly you're convinced every time you go in the ocean, you're going to get eaten by a shark.
It's so true. Our brains love to make those kind of quick connections, even if they're not statistically sound.
Right. And to illustrate just how counterintuitive probability can be, Pinker brings up a classic, the Monty Hall problem.
Oh, the Monty Hall problem. That one still gets me every time.
It's a brain twister for sure.
For anyone who hasn't encountered this probability puzzle before, it involves a game show with three doors behind. One is a car, and behind the other two are
And
goats.
you pick a door, any door.
Right, and then Monty, the host, he opens one of the other doors, always revealing a goat, and then here's the kicker. He asks you if you want to stick with your original choice or switch to the remaining closed door.
And what's your gut telling you at this point?
It feels like it should be a 50-50 chance, right?
Right, that's what our intuition tells us. But here's the thing.
Switching doors actually doubles your chances of winning the car.
Exactly. Pinker does a great job walking us through the logic of why that is, and it just goes to show how our gut feelings about probability can be so off base.
It's true. Sometimes the more logical approach feels completely counterintuitive.
And speaking of counterintuitive, Pinker takes this a step further to illustrate how confusing probability with propensity plays out in the real world. He uses that example of misinterpreting a rocket's 99.6% security factor.
Oh, right. So you see that number and think, oh, that's a very small chance of failure, no big deal.
Right. But that figure, it's usually based on the reliability of the individual components. It doesn't factor in things like human error, which dramatically increase the risk.
That's a great example because we see a number and we think we understand the risk, but there's often a lot more to the story.
Exactly. It's not always as straightforward as it seems. And that kind of leads us to our next big hurdle ourselves, even with logic and probability on our side. There's this whole other layer of irrationality we bring to the table just by being human.
So we've covered logic, we've talked about probability, but even then it feels like there's this whole other layer to unpack when it comes to human irrationality.
Right.
Like, what about those times when whole groups of people seem to embrace beliefs or ideas that just fly in the face of reason? It's like,
Yeah.
how does that even happen?
Well, Pinker digs into that too, and it gets really interesting.
Hey, on me.
He introduces this concept called the my side bias.
Okay, the my side bias, I've heard of that.
It basically boils down to this natural human tendency we all have to favor information that confirms what we already believe, even if those beliefs are demonstrably false.
It's like we're all walking around with these blinders on, filtering out anything that doesn't fit our worldview.
Exactly. And it's not just about seeking out information that supports our side. It also affects how we process information in general.
Like, we're more critical of information that challenges our views.
Exactly. We scrutinize it more harshly, looking for flaws and loopholes while giving our own side a free pass.
It's so true. It's like we're always ready to play defense when it comes to our own beliefs.
Right. And Pinker takes it a step further with this idea that sometimes holding extreme views can actually be a way of signaling loyalty to a group.
Hold on. How can being extreme be rational in any sense?
It's not rational in the sense of logic or evidence, but more about social signaling.
So more about fitting in than being right.
Exactly. It's like saying, look how much I believe in this. I'm willing to embrace even the most outlandish ideas to prove I'm one of you.
It's like a social litmus test almost.
Exactly. And Pinker connects this to what we're seeing today with political polarization and these echo chambers on social media.
Oh, absolutely. It's like everyone's trapped in their own little information bubble these days.
Right, and those bubbles, they just amplify the my side bias, making it even harder to break free.
So it's like a vicious cycle then.
It can be, and Pinker doesn't sugarcoat that, but he does offer some glimmers of hope.
Okay, I could use some of those right now because this is all starting to feel a little, well, a little depressing.
Right. But he reminds us of the importance of institutions that uphold standards of rationality. Places like universities, reputable news sources that are committed to rigorous debate, fact-checking, evidence-based decision-making.
Those pillars of rationality.
Exactly. And he's also pretty wary of social media and its tendency to prioritize likes and shares over accuracy.
Yeah, that's something I've been thinking about a lot lately.
He argues that we need to be more discerning about the information we consume and share online. And most importantly, he advocates for something he calls active open-mindedness.
Active open-mindedness. I like the sound of that. What does that look like?
It's about making a conscious effort to engage with viewpoints that are different from our own, really challenge our own assumptions and be open to changing our minds when presented with compelling evidence.
It's about being willing to learn and grow, even if it means admitting we were wrong.
Exactly. It's about embracing intellectual humility and recognizing that none of us have all the answers.
It's a journey, not a destination.
Well said. It's about being open to that journey of discovery, even when it takes us in unexpected directions.
This has been a fascinating conversation. Thanks for taking the time to break it all down with me.
My pleasure. It's always great to dive into these ideas, and I hope our listeners found it insightful too.
Me too. And I hope it inspires everyone to embrace a little more active open-mindedness in their own lives.
Couldn't agree more.
That's all the time we have.